So we're going to discuss the 1892 Winchester Henrys. That doesn't make any sense, but after this video, it will. So, in the early days of Western movie making, they did not have the luxury like we do now of having companies out there that actually recreate these awesome Western firearms. So you can get a real gun that's just like the old West gun, but it's modern made. Back then, they were using originals, and they were modifying some rifles to look like the Henrys, because Henrys, even then, were a bit hard to come by and valuable and rare. And so they were trying to recreate the look of the 1860 Henry by using Winchesters. So I have seen some 1873 model Winchesters with the forearm removed and the receiver made to look like brass. I've also seen some 1892 Winchesters that have the forearm removed, and that's the easiest way to start looking like a Henry, because the Henry did not have the wooden forearm, so you just have the lower magazine tube and you have the barrel on top of that. Now, the Henry has a longer receiver than the 1892 Winchester, so when we start getting into the 1892 Winchesters, it didn't quite look like the Henry. And so what Stembridge, which was a gun rental house since the very early days and then has since gone out of business, but what Stembridge started doing was recreating just the front end of a Henry receiver out of like pot metal or something, and then they would braze that on to the front of the 1892 Winchester receiver to create a longer receiver and look more like a Henry. Then they would plate the whole receiver with that piece added in brass to look like the brass receiver of the Henry. And then on some of them, they nickel plated the magazine tube and the barrel, which I don't know why they did that, because the Henrys didn't necessarily have that. They were blued and had a brass receiver. But anyway, that's what they did. So now we have these 1892 Winchesters made by Stembridge with this front end of a little Henry piece on the front, and that worked, you know. So you might have seen them on Bonanza or some other Westerns. One of the dead giveaways for the Winchester would be that you are loading it from the side of the receiver through that port there, that little trap door. And the Henrys, you would load by taking the follower, the spring-loaded follower, you would grab that nub, that tip there, and you would slide it all the way up to the end of the barrel. Then you would twist the barrel, and then you would load your rounds one at a time down the tube. And then you would twist that back, and then you would lower your follower to the last cartridge there, and then that would create the spring pressure to slowly feed each round as you levered the gun. So as you were firing the gun, you would have to make sure that at some point when you felt that follower touch your fingers, it would also let you know kind of where you're at as far as ammunition, but you have to get your hand up and over that so that it doesn't get in the way of the spring pushing your rounds, feeding your rounds with every time you lever that gun. So it is a little weird that on the molded parts of the fake Henrys, the 92 Winchester Henrys, they have that follower nub there down at the bottom, which would be recreating an empty Henry, not a loaded Henry. But not a lot of us catch that or know that, or only a few of us really care. But it's just an FYI. So a couple of interesting things about working the Henry on a movie set. You have to be careful when loading the Henry with just a few cartridges, because if you load it fully, you know, you take that follower and you move the front of the muzzle over and you rest the follower, the spring-loaded follower, against the front cartridge. You know, it's not much distance. It's just there it is. And then as you lever the gun, you're feeding those cartridges and the followers moving with them. But if you load just a few, let's say your character only has 3 shots left, and you put 3 cartridges in that magazine, and then you're twisting the muzzle over and you go to lower that follower against all the way, you have to lower it all the way down against those blanks. If it accidentally slips out of your fingers and slams home really hard, it'll actually slam that front cartridge into the cartridge behind it. And the cartridge behind it is crimped, it's a blank, it's crimped into sort of a point, and it's resting against the primer of the cartridge in front of it. So when you slam all that together, guess what can happen? That one blank can go off inside there because of the cartridge behind it, the tip of it hitting the primer of it. I've seen it happen. I saw someone loading on set once years ago, and it accidentally slipped out of his fingers. Oops, and bam, pop. You know, and it took the it took the magazine and just spread it open a little bit. So careful when loading your Henry with just a few cartridges. if I'm putting a Henry in an actor or actress's hands and I want it to look loaded on camera, I can't have that empty slit down the length of the magazine. You can see it's just a spring and there's no cartridges in there. So to make it look loaded, you got to put a bunch of dummy rounds in there. Now, to clear all those dummy rounds with the first AD, the actor or actress, and anyone else around that needs to know that takes a while. So what I started to do to make my job more efficient is to take this rubber. It's basically just a rubber string of cartridges and then painted. I had this made up at the prop house, and I just slide this down the magazine tube after I show the first AD and the actor, hey look, rubber cartridge stick. And I would shove that down in there, and then, you know, through the slit on the side of the Henry, or the bottom of the Henry, it looks loaded. So kind of cool, looks neat, it's weird, but it works. Anyway, so they would braze on the front piece onto the 92 Winchester, played it all, and they didn't do like an immaculate job, but they did pretty good. Now they knew they were going to try to grind the brazing, the welding process smooth so that you didn't see the seam so easy between the fake part and the real receiver. And so it looked like that they had had the forethought to re-punch the serial numbers a little bit further down the receiver in case they ground off the original serial numbers. So you can see two sets of serial numbers, and you can see the S stamped in there, which is for Stembridge Rental House. So that's kind of neat. This particular one is interesting to me because this one, they goofed up. You can see they mismatched a 2 and a 7 there in that serial number. Now here's some comparisons of a Henry, a modern-made Italian replica Henry that we use in the movies, and some of these original 92 faux Henrys. What's kind of interesting is that these Winchesters, in and of themselves, being original 92 Winchesters, are valuable now, of course. And in the 50s, they weren't quite as old, but it's still interesting and weird to think that, I mean, some of these are serial numbers date them out to the 1890s and then into the early 1900s. So they're valuable in and of themselves as an original early 92 Winchester. Now they've been Frankensteined, but the fact that they've been Frankensteined in period of some of the greatest Westerns and used on some of the greatest Westerns. I wish we had records of whose hands these were in and what movies they were on. But it's just, you know, does this decrease the value of a Winchester or make it more valuable? In my mind, if nothing else, it should at least cancel out and just be, you know, the same value of an original old Winchester. But to me, they're a little bit cooler because they're very unique, obviously, the way they are and with their history and provenance.